Good afternoon, everyone. As you're just joining, we're going to give it a couple of minutes, as we usually do, to let everyone log in. We've got some good numbers for this event, so looking forward to seeing everyone and having an interesting interactive conversation. Hopefully on your screen, you can already see a QR code. If you could take the time just to register your vote in the first poll. We've got a couple of more polls to come over the next hour just to get a bit of flavour from the audience to inform the discussion as we go. So the usual drill, just click on the QR code using your camera and put in a vote. So we'll just keep it quiet for a minute or two while everyone joins in. We're just having interesting conversations in the green room. I often think we should record those as well, actually, and put them out on social, hearing about things that people are up to, how busy everyone is, Tom in particular. Sounds like he's spinning multiple plates, and I can understand why, because most of the businesses I work with are desperate to talk to him all the time because of the success of MG. So we'll just give it another minute or so, but if you've just joined, if you could click on the QR code on the screen and vote in the poll, that would be much appreciated. Just a few more people arriving. I'll just wait until 2 minutes past and then we'll kick off. Thanks to those just joining. Okay, so we're a couple of minutes in, so I think we'll get going. So first of all, thank you all very much for finding the time to come and hopefully participate in our webinar. Those of you who are familiar with this format, we do them about every quarter. We try to add a bit of variety in subject matter and panelists. And in fact, we're taking a slightly different approach today. We're going to have a slightly more deep chat with our main guest, and I'll introduce him in a moment. You'll have seen him on the advanced publicity, and you'll probably know why we think is of great interest to all of us. He's got a great track record and also responsible for a very interesting brand that is highly relevant to the topic. So the topic is, in shorthand, why is the market doing so well when all we hear is bad news in so many different channels? The word gravity is used a lot these days. You're probably hearing it a lot at the moment with Keir Starmer, political gravity. And I think the car industry is wondering the same about the market. You know, are we defying gravity? Is it a natural process? Is it an unnatural process? The SMMT have upped their forecast to just under 2.1 million units this year, which would be an almost 4% increase year on year. The highest annual total since 2019, as we all know. But in April alone, the sales were up 27%. So it's, sorry, 24%. So we're up 9% year to date, but April was 24%. So what's happening? Is this a cause for optimism? Should we be investing more in rolling the ball down the hill faster? And that's what we're going to be discussing. So the first thing I'd like to do is introduce our speakers. And the first person to mention, a lot of you know him already, is Tom Wharfe. He's the head of brands for UK and Europe at MG, that brand that everyone is talking about. He made his name at the BMW Group, but has also worked at another Chinese brand, NIO. And I was interested to see, Tom, that you spent a little bit of time at John Lewis in between, something I'm a big fan of, seeing the industry in a different way and seeing a different vertical. What was your thinking there when you went to a different kind of retailer?
Incredibly insightful and really hi everyone, by the way. Yeah, incredibly insightful and a steep learning curve. Really interesting to get insight into a totally different industry, fast pace, much faster kind of turnaround of purchase decisions and everything. So yeah, it was eye-opening and interesting, but ultimately I missed cars too much, so I came back.
Well, it's terrific to have you. Thanks for coming back and for finding the time to join us. The other speaker is Anton Hanley. Doesn't really need an introduction. Everyone knows Anton well. When he's not obsessing about lead quality, which frankly is most of the time, you can find him on a plane to Harvard or Shenzhen. I think he's fully recovered from his sub 3 hour marathon that he ran last week for the Heart Research UK. But from what I read on your LinkedIn post, Anton, that's the final bit of the marathon jigsaw for you. So job done.
Not really, Patrick. It never stops. We've got a team charity trip to Frankfurt actually later in the year. So if anyone's on this call who really wants to join our TLA charity marathon to Frankfurt, let us know.
Of course, the job is never done. I think we all know what that means, having had a couple of years that we've all had. So before we start, I'm going to set the scene a little bit with some data from my alma mater, which is Sophos 3. Many of you will be familiar with them. They're an analytics agency that work in the car industry, been around for 20 years odd. And they have an interesting product called eData Exchange, which allows you to benchmark performance in digital across different brands. So most of the data you'll be seeing on these slides comes from that. I cherry picked some KPIs which I find interesting and hopefully will inform the debate to an extent. I came across this quote from Auto Express. I used to be a journalist, and I know how journalists like to slightly exaggerate. But this was coming into 2025, and it was really quite a negative prediction of how the car market was going to unfold. And I think we know why that was the sense back then. Affordability was a big topic, and obviously EVs were unprofitable for most manufacturers and showed no signs of changing. And the car industry, as we all know, historically likes to spend its way out of trouble. I've been around long enough to know that a bear market doesn't really hang around for long, and there's a way of stimulating demand. But as we all know, the past 6 years, really since COVID, have given it too much to deal with at once. You can overcome one or two big challenges, but to have the five or six that we've been experiencing has proven a mighty task. That has led to a lot of cost savings. Teams have been decimated, budgets cut back, and that has an effect on creativity, on the way that car brands go to market. So, with all this in mind, and it's not a new thing, this has been happening for years, as we know. Why is this year looking like a strong year? So, the first thing I wanted to show you is a bit of data about consumer traffic to car brand sites, so the .co.uk's. As you can see, in 2024, you were looking at quite good growth year on year. And then there was a big dip at the beginning of last year, and that was triggered by the introduction of the LLMs, the AI large language models, in particular ChatGPT, Gemini, which distracted a lot of people from their normal car buying research process. In my head, that was likely to continue, but it looks like it hasn't. And in fact, there was a recovery halfway through last year, which has been sustained. So looking at car brand traffic as a whole, it has actually increased year on year. However, it's not necessarily good news for individual manufacturers because a lot of that growth is being powered by, guess who? The Chinese brands. So if we look at the winners in the past quarter, you can see that Chinese brands dominate. So those percentages look very exciting in terms of year-on-year growth. They're obviously coming from a low base, and there's reasons why some brands like Jaecoo, like Automotive perhaps, are performing well at the moment because there's a lot of buzz around their products. But it's a real change. It's a real shock to the system to see this top 10 in digital audience growth dominated by new brands. MG, of course, is always also performing very well. In normal times, plus 35% would be an extraordinary performance. But of course, MG is relatively mature in the UK market. It's already been doing its best to dominate and is the leading brand for digital interest amongst car buying consumers. The other thing we thought would be quite interesting to show you is competitor set for the brand that was hitting the headlines last month, Jaecoo, because it was the UK's biggest selling model, the Jaecoo 7. And it's a snapshot, but it is pretty fascinating to see that mix of brands there. You know, Audi being a premium brand, Tesla probably a premium brand, a Motor perhaps you'd expect to see there, Kia you would expect to see there. So one of the things we'll go on to talk about later is this whole concept of premium. Has it changed? Is it changing? What does it mean for the car market going forward? And you know, how can it help new brands leapfrog the usual logic to get into a strong sales position? So what is underlying that data? Well, the growth last year, so this was Q1 last year, was already pretty extraordinary. It was plus 24% on the previous year, 2024. And I remember saying in similar webinars, you know, it'd be really exciting if they could get to 5% digital market share. Guess what? They haven't just gone to 5%, they got to 10%. And the growth year on year is incredible, plus 127% compared with 2025. So this is customers taking more than an interest in a Chinese brand. It's more than curiosity. It's clearly now part of the research process, and that is driving consumer behavior down the sales funnel, and we're seeing it in the sales results. So where is the traffic coming from? And how is AI affecting that? So the first one, which I think is a bit surprising, is that organic search for the first quarter of this year is up 6% on the first quarter of last year. Now, bear in mind, that's when the large language models were launching, and they were really being given a lot of attention by consumers. But I do think that year-on-year increase is impressive. What is perhaps more interesting is the way that the direct traffic, so people putting the brand into the browser and going there directly, is down dramatically. And that makes sense if you think of the way that people use AI. When they've got a single question to answer, they're more likely to get it from Gemini, from another LLM. Previously, they probably would have gone to the car manufacturer and tried to find the answer. Now they go to the AI assisted search and they get it straight away. And the other thing that is probably powering the original audience graph I showed you a moment ago is brands spending money to get audience. Again, nothing new there. We've been doing it for 20 years. But the increase on Q1 last year is pretty amazing. So that's big budget being invested for visibility. And if you look at the websites in aggregate, so each one of those lines, if you can make it out, is a website, a car brand website in the UK. You can see that the range is extraordinary. So at the top, some brands are getting most of their or even all of their traffic from organically. At the bottom, they're spending a lot on getting 55 plus% of their traffic is coming from paid sources. But the message here is it's very different across the market. There isn't a consistency. And in fact, if you look at how manufacturers drive traffic to their website, the range is quite wide. So just to explain this graph, the dark at the bottom of the bar is the average for the market. So the average traffic to each section of the website. And the lighter bar at the top is the upper range. So it really just shows you how dramatically different the strategies are between different brands. Lead forms is the most interesting. So 5% is your average traffic of your overall traffic to a car brand site goes to the lead form page, but some brands are driving as much as 70%. So there's a disagreement in how to manage the customer journey. Another big difference is how the different sites are constructed. So there are lots of caveats behind this data because, as we know, in particular, brands have different number of models, and that drives the size of their site. But the number you see below the brand is the number of pages by brand. So MG, we know, has prioritized the retail footprint very successfully, fleet sales as well. I'm sure Tom would agree the website has more potential, and I'm sure that's something that is being worked on. Polestar, however, despite having a small range, has an e-commerce focus, but it has generated a lot of pages to get there. Is that a good thing? Is that a negative? Could it result in confusion for customers? Porsche has a lot of visits per sale because it attracts a lot of enthusiasts. And finally, Leapmotor, which is obviously another young Chinese stroke European brand, is investing heavily in visibility. So, it's getting traffic, but the numbers are surprisingly high. So just to summarize the different data points, the reassuring thing is that customers have never been more active. So that hopefully frames the discussion. The demand isn't going away. It could be building. It bodes well for the rest of the year, but the fact that each brand approaches the challenge slightly differently is potentially confusing for the customer. It's not a blocker. Customers are still buying cars, but it does make you think if it was more streamlined and there was more agreement between brands on how to manage the customer journey, you would see digital supporting the sales. And we will be talking a bit about AI and the effect that's having on actual transactions later on in the discussion. And then finally, it's huge potential for growth. If we get all these things right, if we get the digital journey optimized, then it can drive demand, it can stimulate the market in a way that it probably already is to an extent, but perhaps not as much as we believe it could. So I'm now going to hand over to our big guest of the day, Tom. And Tom, I'll keep driving the deck, so just let me know when you want to transition. Over to you.
Cool, thanks, Patrick. Hi, everyone. Nice to be here. I don't like being introduced as the big guest, though. But yeah, nice to talk to you guys and offer my perspective on things. Let's flick on, please, Patrick. So I thought I would. Oh, one more, please. I thought I'd open up with a quote, my response to the question that the guys asked me to have a think about for the topic today. And my response for how the market is performing right now and the reasons for that is this. So I would say that the market is strong right now, not because demand is particularly high, but because the barriers to purchase are very low, as Patrick's already sort of touched on, and I'll come on to talk about that in a sec. And I think that for the longer term, right now we are very much in this highly competitive space with new entrants coming in and everyone trying to get their share of the pie. But in the longer term, the brands that do the best will be the ones that find that balance and essentially turn that temporary market share into a longer term preference for people buying into the brand. So what does that mean? Let's flick on. So I think we can group all of the factors into these three key buckets from my perspective. So these are the things that are what are driving such a strong sales performance this year so far, as I see it. The first, new entrants. Second, fuel prices. Third is a mandate and the EV government grant. So in terms of new entrants, I think the big thing here, we know that that there's a lot of new brands entering the market, primarily Chinese. And this, of course, we've seen is leading to hugely aggressive discounting, which essentially, as Patrick said already, is these brands buying their place in the market and buying their share, which is essentially what they're doing versus building genuine preference for the brand and the car. I mean, don't get me wrong, the car's good, But that's the way they are choosing to enter the market and really drive their volume. It's certainly how MG have done it in the past, and we're seeing it again from the likes of Automotive, Jaecoo, BYD, and others. So that's the thing that's really driving the hugely aggressive position in the market at the moment. I've never seen so many 0% APR offers at any one time. So it's a brilliant time to buy a car and a new car. So yeah, lots of really good value offers out there, either from the new entrants or the brands that are trying to compete and stay competitive. Second, fuel prices. So this clearly is changing or causing a shift in behavior with rising prices. It is certainly causing people to evaluate whether now is the time to switch to an electric car, or if not electric, an electrified offering of sorts, so a HEV or PHEV. And I would say that it's actually driving a mindset shift now from should I go electric, which is where we've been for the last number of years, to a more rational perspective of why wouldn't I go electric. So now it just makes sense to really think about going electric, because those prices are going up once again, and the cost of ownership is just increasing. So that, I think, is driving a behavior shift, much higher consideration for electric cars. And as we've seen from data and a number of sources, when people make the switch to electric, there's a much lower level of brand loyalty, so higher brand switching. And then that, I think, is opening up the opportunity for the new entrants or just other brands to win customers. And then the third, ZEV mandate and EV grant. We've seen the BEV share increase this year, but the forecast is still below the ZEV mandate target. So I think as we get towards the end of the year, it's already driving quite aggressive pricing from a lot of manufacturers to ensure that that they get close or hit their targets. I think as we get closer to the end of the year, as we have seen over previous years, there's going to be a higher level of competition to really make sure they hit those targets and avoid the fines, as well as, of course, the EV grant from the government, which for the brands that can take advantage of that is also helping them to reduce the price. So all of that is essentially bringing prices down across the board and really driving this hyper competitive environment to make the cars cheaper and much more compelling for customers. And in terms of for the rest of the year, I think these factors will still certainly. If we can just flick back, actually, please. Sorry, before we go on to this. For the rest of the year, I think these factors are going to stay the same. I can't see them changing. It's certainly going to increase in terms of new entrants, and not just new entrants, but actually the number of cars that they're offering. So more choice in the market, more competition, and yeah, more aggressive pricing. Fuel prices certainly is going to lead to higher inflation. So that will be interesting to see what happens there. I think the aggressive nature of the market at the moment will probably mean that doesn't become too much of a factor in terms of pricing, but it could do, but I don't think it will. I think pricing will still stay incredibly competitive. The interesting factor that I wonder may come into play will be a transition for people maybe previously looking to buy a used, realizing that a new car offering is more compelling or just as compelling, and therefore making a switch to a new car purchase versus used. I've not seen any data of it in the UK yet, but I have heard from other markets that they're seeing the impact of the competitive entrant strategy from Chinese brands causing a disruption in the used car market because it's just more compelling to buy new. So that could happen. Don't know, but it'll be interesting to see how that pans out for the rest of this year and possibly into next year too. So yeah, moving on to the next slide. What does this mean for us as brands in general? I thought I'd summarize with 3 key points. So the first is that as I've said, we're operating in a increasingly value-driven market now, with this hyper competitiveness, and even us as MG are having to adapt our approach to stay competitive. We can't ignore that consumers are being driven by this value message, and the market is being driven by not necessarily price point, but value overall. And that means something different to a whole range of brands, whether you're premium, mainstream, or value. But I think overall, yeah, that kind of price point and value messaging is absolutely key, across certain levels of marketing and sales opportunity. Second is the requirement to balance the short-term value message with longer-term brand building. So, as I said at the start, it's not just about driving the value message for the short term. We need to make sure that we are building that brand value and resonance with our customers and people that are interested in buying into the brand, for more longer term value and appeal. And I think that's absolutely key to find that balance. So it's not just the buying the space in the market, but actually building that longevity. And then third is kind of obvious, but it's so hard now. There's so many brands spending a lot more money than they had done in the past, to do marketing, and the brands that actually cut through are the ones that are really going to find that success. And I think it's about doing it in consistent ways as well. So cutting through consistently, so that your marketing lands the message that you need to. So that's all I was going to say for my introduction. Hopefully that is interesting and makes some sense and resonates with you guys.
Yeah, very much so. Thanks, Tom. That's really interesting. I think the debate about the role of brand is something we've all been thinking about for some time. You know, are we becoming more of a product-led sales culture where it's about features rather than brand? After 100 years of brand being dominant, I think that's something we will revisit. Very interesting point to make.
Yeah.
Okay, so that takes us to Anton. Same applies, Anton. Just let me know when you want me to transition.
Yeah, thank you, Patrick. If we could just go to the next slide, that'd be great. Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. Great to be here. Thanks, Tom, for joining. Thanks, Patrick, for hosting. Just wanted to frame the current situation and then go into some proprietary insights from the TLA data. So based on the current run rate and forecast, we're looking at a 2.09 million new car registration year, which if we did achieve that, it's a 3.6% year on year. So far, we're looking at 764,000 units registered between Jan and April, which is a 9% year-on-year increase. And we're seeing that growth come from consumer demand. We're seeing that 11.7% increase. So what that's illustrating is private car buyers are back, and we're going to go into some reasons later on as to why that is occurring. As already mentioned by yourself, Patrick and Tom, Chinese-owned brands are certainly reshaping the market. You only got to walk around your car park or take a look out the window on the motorway, and the brands you're seeing now are certainly very different to the brands you saw a handful of years ago. And we're getting to this EV affordability tipping point, which seems to be driven by Chinese brands. And a nice stat is the 2 millionth UK EV was registered in April, which I think just shows, how far we've actually come. So just moving to the next slide, please, Patrick. So we did some analysis on the gap that occurred as a result of the pandemic, and depending on what data you look at, it's anything from 1.4 million to up to 2 million new cars were potentially lost as a result of the pandemic, which kind of illustrates the fact that a lot of consumers, didn't purchase, held off And that plays into this next stat, which is the car park age at present is at 9.7 years old, which is considerably up from where it was in 2019, where it was around that 8 year point. Which just when you think that through in regards to older products, more things going wrong. I was actually listening earlier today to Robert Forrester doing the Virtue Motors update, and he was saying after sales, yet again is up, and I think again that really connects. The older car park, people having to go in, costing more for maintenance, costing more when their car has to have parts changed. So in some instances, consumers aren't necessarily changing or buying a new car out of the fact that, they want a new car. It's out of the fact that the car needs to be replaced, and there's some incredible deals in the market. We touched upon, or Tom touched upon, he's never seen as many 0% APRs as he's seeing now, and that's exactly what we're seeing. We're seeing such incredible finance deals and some incredible discounts on cars, driven by the number of brands, driven by ZEV mandate, driven by brands needing to either hold on to market share or prevent further erosion, or obviously with a new entrants looking for that maximum growth. So if we could just go to the next slide, please, Patrick. So the paradox of growth, we're seeing the GfK index at -25. That's the lowest since October 23. We're seeing consumers holding/hoarding more cash than pre-pandemic. Why is that? We've already touched upon it. There's a lot of instability in the market. The economy isn't the strongest. Geopolitics. You alluded to it at the start. Will Starmer be in place, next week? Never mind, in the next election. There's a lot of uncertainty in the world. You said we're going to talk about AI later on in the webinar. A lot of people are concerned what impact that has on employment. So those two factors would make one believe that it seems irrational to forecast a real growth new car market, but that's what we're seeing. And that's where that paradox lies. And Tom and yourself laid out the reasons why. It's because there's all of these, there's a cocktail of factors at play, which mean that actually consumers are having to change, and it is a good time to change. And you're seeing this squeeze. The brands at the top are holding on. The brands at the bottom are registering more units. Those in the middle are certainly being squeezed, and we're seeing that from those middle of the market brands. So moving on to the next slide, Patrick, to talk about some of our proprietary data, please. So what we did was we got the data team. Adam went through and he analyzed 300,000 inquiries over the last 2 years. So quite a significant data set. And what we're seeing based on the consumers who are coming into the TLA network of sites and inquiring to request test drives, brochures, quotations. Like I say, this is just within a 2 year period, 24 to 26, across 300,000 consumers. We're seeing them come in with a significant reduction in deposit. We're seeing a -27%. Part exchange values are down. We're seeing consumers with an older vehicle that are looking to part exchange. We're seeing brand loyalty kind of is eroding. Inquiries from buyers cross-shopping a brand they don't own, demand more contestable than ever. But we are seeing that purchase intent is stable. So, this slide is just demonstrating customers are wanting to spend less. They're looking to move fairly quickly. They've got older part exchange. And, again, in line with what Tom said there, they're less loyal than they've ever been. Okay, so moving on to the next slide, please. Again, no surprise where we look at this slide in where the growth is going. So the top 8 brands by units gained year to date. Some of these, like Patrick, you referred to the Jaecoo 7 top selling model in March. 6 out of these 8 brands, as you can see, they're all Chinese owned, and that is where the growth. An interesting stat, the Chinese owned story. So that net growth, 100% of it is coming from those Chinese brands, which is quite interesting when we did that analysis. So moving on just to the final slide, which is just penultimate slide. Again, referred to earlier, we've got this war in the Middle East, which is driving uncertainty in price increases when it comes to internal combustion engine. And we're also seeing that from the brands we work with, whereas maybe go back 12, 18 months, there's a lot of emphasis on electric vehicle campaigns. We're now being tasked with addressing, bringing more consumers in on the internal combustion engine because they're seeing more demand across the hybrid and BEV options. And a really interesting stat, for the first time, we're seeing the average new EV vehicle below the average ICE, which I believe, going back a couple of years, we thought that was going to happen around 2030, and we've exceeded that significantly as a market. You've now got more sub 20,000 EVs on sale, like the Leapmotor TO3 and the Dacia Spring. And those market conditions are really driving the further registrations of electric vehicles, which we're seeing in our data and the registrations coming through SMMT. Okay, so moving on just to the final slide, which is just a bit of a kind of keep an eye on what's ahead and just things we're talking about internally. Obviously, there's a significant amount of revenue, fuel duty, which will be lost as a result of the changing market. And it was announced in the budget last year that by 2028, there was going to be charges on a per mile basis for EVs and PHEVs. So just what impact, we've looked at the impact in other countries like New Zealand, what happens when that comes in, and it can have a detrimental impact on registration. So it's one for us to keep an eye on. And just the tariffs. The UK basically has its front door wide open for Chinese brands, and I think it's the third largest market in the world for Chinese models to be exported into. As long as tariffs stay low, that will no doubt stay the same. But these are just 2 areas internally within TLA we're keeping a very close eye on, because that will obviously impact the total market registrations.
Thanks, Anton. Some really interesting data there, and it'd be good to have a bit more interaction from the audience if you could participate in this poll in the usual way. Housekeeping, if you want to ask a question, please just put it in the chat. We won't use the Q&A, if we could use the chat for that, just to make it nice and simple. Or put your hand up and you can take the floor. And I'd like to pick up on the bit of data you showed about consumer confidence, Anton, because if you look at the poll we ran at the beginning of the session, some people are feeling pretty confident. You've got 20% of our audience are saying it could be above 2.2 million this year, which would be incredible. The majority are saying it's going to be above 2.1, which is the current SMMT forecast. And consumer confidence is a funny old game, as we know. Can both of you just have a think, or have your guess? Where do you think consumer confidence is right now? Why was April up 24% year on year? Do you think confidence is stronger than the stats suggest, or are we going to see a slowdown after a bit of a strong surge at the beginning of the year? Perhaps starting with you, Tom. What's your gut telling you? How optimistic are you feeling?
I'm feeling optimistic, but I think my response is that I think there's a lag. So I think consumer confidence has just dipped since the start of the war, and we're seeing those numbers come through now. I don't think the car market has quite caught up with that. There's lots of other factors coming into play, as we've sort of highlighted, that I think are countering that dip in confidence right now. I do wonder whether, if that continues, whether there will be a lag effect and there is a bit of a slowing on demand. But I do think there's quite a large proportion of the car market which is relatively resilient to the state of the economy and consumer confidence because of the amount of car deals bought on finance. It actually doesn't make much difference to people to just renew their finance deal and pay possibly even less because of how competitive it is at the moment. So I think overall, I'm optimistic for all the reasons that we've already outlined in terms of what's going on, and yeah, there could be a slowing effect, but I kind of feel like it's still going to continue at the rate it is at the moment.
Great. So yeah, Anton, question to you. You specialize in telling the truth, being honest about where demand is and how to improve it. What's your data currently telling you? Do you think going to see continued growth and resilience, or I'm not sure?
Yeah, and our market position just reflects what is happening in the market, both from a consumer perspective and from a supply perspective. We are optimistic, and we had a pre-call with Tom a couple of days ago, and just talking through that point a little bit more detail around new car buyers potentially who are sitting in that used car category being pulled into new car registrations. I think as that price point drops, and when you factor in consumers have got a lot of uncertainty around the price of fuel, and when they can maybe get into an electric vehicle and reduce their monthly outgoing to a lower all-in rate. I think we could see growth within that as a result of taking market share from the used car category, which is something we're going to put a lot of emphasis on within TLA. We're certainly going to try and target that market, and we're doing a lot of insight analysis into that opportunity at present. But we are optimistic. We believe, as a result of more and more product innovation, both legacy and from China, that it's a very exciting category, and it becomes more and more of a priority as it becomes more and more exciting for the consumer to access these products, and the price point comes down.
Yeah, and that's an interesting point you raise about new versus used. And Tom, that's something you've talked to us about. I think the used car market is roughly flat year on year. But you did make the point that you could be tempted into a new car through the amazing finance deals, despite the fact you might think of yourself as a used car shopper. Is that something you're seeing in the showroom?
Yeah. Well, we're not seeing any clear signs of it yet. It's a bit of a hypothesis, and based on I've had some feedback I can't remember which market it was. I think it was maybe Australia or something, and they made some comments around some new entrants being so cheap that it actually decimated. They use that word. I don't know if they're maybe overplaying it a bit, but decimated the used car market, or probably the nearly new, because it was just such a really, really strong offer. And I think it's kind of obvious, isn't it? When not necessarily people that are buying used cars that are 8 years old or something, but those that are on the fence, that sometimes buy new, sometimes maybe buy used because they can get a slightly, better car for their money if they buy used. I think those people that sit on the fence more of them may well get pulled into new now, especially with the amount of 0% APR, and especially with how cheap the cars are being priced at as well. So yeah, there no clear and strong data on it yet, but I do hypothesize that that's going to happen. And well, yeah, I think you mentioned if used car sales are flat but new car sales are increasing, maybe that's an indication already that could be happening.
Yeah, I saw a bit of data put out by ASI, the retail pricing specialist. Stuart Walker put out a post saying that the Tiguan transaction price is typically £7,500 cheaper than the list price. And I think this is what you find out, isn't it, when you go to a dealer and they don't have the used car that you want, and they start having a conversation about a new car, and you realise you can afford it. And that's always a great moment in your life because you're getting a real thing.
I think
So
just one point I'd add on that though, which we've seen a lot in all the brands I work with, is over the years, it kind of very much depends on where the dealers are making the money as well. So if the dealers are making more money of used cars, they'll make sure they sell that car to the customer versus the new. So there is that customer factor, but then there's the dealer factor wherever the money and the margins are being made, which tends to push the sales.
100%, you might have that conversation at the end of the month when they're trying to a bigger target rather than the beginning
Yeah.
when they're probably trying to make more money from the used transaction. Very good point. So moving on to the Chinese brands, and James has asked a question in the chat about what is actually going to drive brand strength in the future. And he makes the point about pricing, and this might be a tricky one for you to answer, Tom, but I think the impression the commentators have is that Chinese brands have even more flexibility on price than they're currently showing, and that means that even when the traditional brands become competitive, they could turn it up a notch and make pricing even more fierce.
Mm.
I mean, what in so far as you can answer that, what do you make of that discussion about value versus brand versus feature?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the Chinese brands, it's a general comment, a lot of the Chinese brands will be happily operating at a loss or very, very low margins right now, just to get their position in the market. And that pricing strategy we're seeing, I'm not going to single out any one brand, but we're seeing it in a few cases where they're using very, very aggressive pricing to enter the market. And then other products that are coming are being priced at a much higher price point. So it's clearly a strategy just to get a foothold, and then prices are increasing to start to gain some perhaps more acceptable margins from a profit perspective. So yeah, I think it's a short-term strategy, to be honest. It can't be sustained profitably, but yeah, I think for now we're seeing a lot of that. The focus in the mid to long term, and it's certainly for us at MG, and I'm sure many other brands, is to make sure that you build that brand equity to allow you to perhaps charge that higher price point and not have to operate at such wafer thin margins or even a loss to get the products sold. So that is where kind of the point I was trying to make in my slides is really key, that you find that balance of getting that tactical strong value message out there when it's the best opportunity to do so, but also finding those channels and approaches to marketing to build the brand over the longer term. And I think with many of the Chinese brands now, or new entrants, they will establish their brand in the longer term just by having their cars on the road. And you're seeing it now. Cars that are yeah, clearly nice to look at, good cars, word of mouth, people owning the cars, people driving the cars, people seeing the cars. That builds a brand way more than any marketing can do. So it's all part of the strategy, isn't it? And I think over time, that will start to come through as the Chinese brands build their foothold, supported by the marketing that inevitably will happen as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a good point about, my neighbour's got one, therefore I believe, he's done his due diligence. It's going to be a good car. I should consider it. And that makes me wonder, Anton, whether you could comment on the kind of typical shopping baskets that your business is coming across when you're kind of the sharp end of the decision-making process. We saw that bit of Jaecoo data that suggested Audi was one of the top three most research competitors, alongside Kia. What do you see? Do you think there is a shift? It's not as easy in the old days, is it? Where, you knew which were the premiums and which were the mass and which were the intermediates. It's now much more confusing.
Yeah, and just referring to data which we've analysed and which is helpful for this conversation is back to that 300,000 data set which we analysed, and just seeing the fact that consumers are more willing to switch than ever before. Like across that data set, it's gone from 63 to 65% in terms of consumers switching out of the current vehicle that they are in. Obviously, as an organisation, we represent the brands we work with, and this year we're on track to generate 250,000 in market customer leads, but they're just for the brands we represent. But I think, as discussed, bottom of the market, where you're seeing, say, bottom of the market, where the new Chinese brands have entered, we're seeing obviously a lot of switching out of legacy brands, and we're looking to do a report on that top of the market. Obviously, you've got the likes of BYD, who's coming in with Denza, who no doubt will compete with some of the more premium brands. But we're seeing all that concentration at the moment at the bottom, and there's certainly less loyalty than ever before there, for obvious reason.
Just sticking with you a moment, Anton, Tommy makes an interesting point about consumer motivations about powertrain. Has the geopolitical stuff that's going on just made people start thinking oil is unstable and bad versus electricity is kind of constant and reliable? And if you look at EVs, I think they're forecast to be up about 20% this year to 500,000 sales. But hybrids have made a big comeback, as we know, and they're also forecast to be up substantially, maybe 25%. I think you mentioned that the way that you're being directed by clients towards hybrids into more of a mix. So what are you seeing at the moment? Is there a renewed interest in promoting EVs, or is it more of a balance?
Yeah, like as mentioned earlier, the questions we're being asked at the moment is, can we help certain brands actually with their ICE, their internal combustion engine product ranges? Because and normally where there's urgency is where there's a need to fill quota and fill those volume targets. So actually, where the problem historically was meeting the volume targets on electric vehicle, in hybrid, funnily enough, now that's starting to switch as a result of that Middle Eastern war, that's now switched completely.
Thanks. So think about the job of a marketing director and trying to get the strategy right, Tom. We had a poll asking about AI and whether it's having a measurable impact on sales. And interestingly, 15% of you, 13%, 15% are saying that it's moving sales already. But the majority is saying possibly not having an effect straight away, but it's certainly building. I mean, as a brand, coming from if I can call it a legacy brand, still very much alive and kicking, obviously, BMW, and now working for a disruptor brand, do you feel you are doing things differently with your marketing money? And are you seeing the benefits of that? Sort of getting rid of the constraints of 20 years of building an old website that then you have to manage. Is there a bit of freedom, and is it having an effect on your decisions?
To a point, yes. But actually, interestingly, so yes, BMW had more kind of legacy systems and things, as you'd expect. But actually, there's quite a bit of that at MG as well, and I'm sure that's just part and parcel of any OEM, to be honest. Actually, the challenge we have with MG is we've grown across Europe so quickly that the systems have not necessarily been constructed in a consistent way across all markets. So we're getting fragmentation. But there are many ways, if you compare kind of the two brands businesses, which I'm sure you can do across the industry, where we are different. Certainly from a Chinese perspective, but also a new business, new brand perspective. There's a lot more pace and flexibility coming into things which I think some of the legacy brands will still have to be contending with, and a lot of that will be cultural as well as just systems and process.
Yeah, thank you. And Anton, there's this question of AI having an effect. I mean, there's no doubt everyone's talking about it, but what's your sense? Is it having an actual effect on sales? In other words, without AI, would the market be smaller? Do you think it's adding sales to the market?
I don't think it's adding any sales. I'm hopeful that it will improve customer service and therefore increase sales in the future. You just look at some of the technologies which are coming online, whether it be Impel or equivalent, where retailers, brands can start to activate, AI response, whether that be SMS, email, or no doubt audio, via the phone in no time at all. And we definitely have that problem, Patrick. Like we are in the business of generating high volume, high quality leads. That there's still some brands who don't have the ability via their network to respond to every single one of those within a time frame you would think to be realistic for a variety of reasons. I'd like to think when this technology comes online, the ideal scenario would be 100% of consumers are getting what they want, whether that be a test drive is booked for them or a prize is provided to them or their part exchange valuation. It's going to take time, but there's some very straightforward entry points where certain things can be done to keep that consumer engaged and not ignored. And actually, Patrick, you and I spoke about it the other day, where you inquired on a brand on one of their very kind of niche models, and you didn't get a response. And we just don't expect that, right, as consumers. So hopefully that problem gets eradicated as the result of technological advancements.
I'd love that. I mean, I was about to say, remind you of that conversation because I made 7 inquiries across 4 different channels for this one car that, although it's niche, is causing a lot of excitement, and I have not got a reply from any of those channels. And I can remember doing surveys 20 years ago when I was working at What Car, and it was exactly the same result. People just weren't taken seriously as buyers unless they phoned up, unless they walked into the dealership, and even then it was hit and miss. So I think this is the big opportunity for AI and the brands in the way that they deploy it. It's basically making me feel like I've been noticed and acknowledged, and something is going to happen because of my interest. Great. So we're very short on time, but I would just like to close with a quick structural question about the shifts in the market. I think we keep wondering, well, will all brands survive? There's just so many brands in play now. Is it too many? Will we see some attrition? And what market share do we think the Chinese brands are going to have going into next year, and then perhaps looking ahead to 2030? I mean, what's your sense, Tom? Are you feeling very confident that you're going to be there and a brand that might have been big once won't?
So I think there are going to be too many brands in the market, with even more coming, first of all. But actually, I think what's going to happen is there'll be more brands in the market taking a smaller slice of the pie, because there is space for the brands to exist if they have a strong offering and the businesses run well enough for the margins to exist. So I think some brands won't survive, but I still think there will be more brands in the market versus what we saw, say, 5 years ago. I think Chinese brands will continue to increase their share over the next few years or so, partly because of the aggressive pricing, but also the very, very strong products that are coming that are improving at a much faster pace than the rest of the OEMs, I think. But I think it will get to a parity point where you have the established players and the new players finding a kind of an equilibrium in the market. I think people still want to buy premium and established brands that do offer perhaps superior quality, technology, customer service in some areas versus the newer brands that offer something different. So I think, yeah, a bit of a balance.
Changes ahead. We'll be talking about this for the next few years for sure. So we're out of time. Sorry, Anton, I can't give you the chance to answer that because we've just up against the clock. But thank you again very much to our speaker, Tom, for sparing the time to share his experiences and give his wisdom. It's been very interesting debate. Anton, as always, love the data behind the things that you're discussing. And of course, thank you to you, our audience, for fitting it into your busy day. We will share the deck with you, and there will be more webinars to come for the end of the year. So watch out for our posts, and please come to the next one as well. But from us, very big thank you, and see you soon.
Thank you, Patrick.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Tom.
Bye.